It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Today we have breaking news. There's an article about to come out about additional hijackings that took place on September 11th. Okay, I was totally unaware of this. I haven't seen this anywhere, but you can find this information on the YouTube channel called 9/11 True Crime by a fellow that goes by the name Thermal Detonator. His name is Nelson, though. So you can find him, and his Patreon, too, as well, is 9/11 True Crime or Thermal Detonator. So, Nelson, Mr. Thermal Detonator, are you there?
Yes. Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Just out of breath. But before we get into this whole 9/11 story, tell us about yourself. Who is Nelson?
Well, I mean, technically, I mean, I'm a DJ. That's my name. That's why they call me. That's why I'm called Thermal Detonator. I usually even go under DJ Thermal Detonator. And I was a Gothic industrial DJ for about over a decade. I haven't DJ'd probably in the past like 8-9 years. But I got into 9/11 truth, 9/11 activism, basically, in around 2007. And, I went through a lot of different phases. And, I really used to believe like the average cult conspiracies, with, I was really into the whole Alex Jones InfoWars thing for like 4 years or so. And just over time, I've come to find out a lot of claims within the 9/11 truth movement, community, research, whatever you want to call it. A lot of it is bogus BS. And for like at least the last, 10 years or so, I've moved myself more as a 9/11 skeptic. And I basically, after my 9/11, activism, and while I was in it still, I eventually started getting into filmmaking, learning how to work with some software, and started a channel, probably 2012. Had different names of the channel, and I started with a film that was called an Inconvenient 9/11 Truth, which was semi-popular, I guess, for the movement, I guess. And
I think I recognize that. An Inconvenient Truth, right?
Yeah, Inconvenient 9/11 Truth.
Right.
Yeah, it's a spoof off of the Al Gore.
Oh, right. That's okay. That's
yeah. So I basically started with that, but then I started to even refine myself with being more accurate. The problem is that besides the people have the general belief of controlled demolitions or just explosives in the Twin Towers. I just prefer to say that explosives. I don't like to say controlled demolition. I'm not even a Building 7 enthusiast like most people in the truth movement are. I don't think people are really shocked when I say that, like that I don't think that it's a demolition. But because of my research, especially with 1993 World Trade Center bombing, that's what makes me a lot more different than most 9/11 truthers. Because I've really studied that a lot, and I've made quite a bit of films on all that. And basically, with an Inconvenient 9/11 Truth, when I put out a part 2, that was my first film I was covering the 93 bombing in, and ever since that I expanded on. But what the big thing, with me is getting out of the hoax claims, and that's the big damage I see with 9/11 Truth, that the claims that the hijackings were fake or they didn't happen, especially it's motivated, especially with the Pentagon attack, that, a lot of people still think that, a missile hit the Pentagon or no plane hit the Pentagon, or, a whole slew of nonsense. And, eventually going through that, and even the shoot down theory of Flight 93 over Shanksville, I held that theory for a long time. I still somewhat, adhered to it. But then once I let that go, about 9 years ago, 10 years ago, my film work and my research definitely changed. And now I cover a lot more things about not just the actual 4 hijackings of 9/11, but the fact that there were other attempts of hijackings occurring at the same airports, but at many more on 9/11. And if people are familiar with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, if your audience is, if they know about Ramzi Youssef and then when he was arrested in the Philippines, and there was the Bojinka plot, which was found on his laptop, which was talking about bombing or hijacking 12 planes. Well, that's true, and that plan did not go away. And that's why one of my films, one of the longest films I have, it's called Bojinka Maximum, the untold, aborted and thwarted hijackings of September 11th and 13th. So one of the reasons why I say the 13th is because, when the airports were shut down after 9/11, when they reopened on September 13th, like 2 days later, at JFK Airport and LaGuardia Airport and other airports in the East Coast, there were hijacking attempts that happened right when they opened, and they had to shut down the airports for a few, till the next day again. And this film covers that extensively. So, my thing is that, pretty much this way, that this is like what I would say most of the truth movement is oblivious to, or they ignore, or basically they have forgotten, is how many people were arrested after 9/11. There were hundreds, but there was like at least over 700 Middle Eastern suspects. Well, a lot of these people were let go, and they were sent back and deported, from 6 months to 2 year span after 9/11, depending on if they had other crimes and stuff. Well, a lot of these people were going to be involved in these other hijacking attempts and other operations that were going on. So it was going to be 9/11 was going to, its initial plans was to be a lot more worse than what it was already.
Let me slow you down for just a quick second here. A couple questions. You say you started your YouTube channel in 2012. Has it ever been shut down or demonetized? Have you had any problems with YouTube?
I've had demonetization. I've had that for at least 5-6 years, but thankfully in the last few months, I've been able to get my monetization back, and even able to do YouTube membership.
Now, and when you talk about the Ramzi Youssef and the Philippines, okay, you're right. They had a plan, and they were talking about bombing the tunnels and bridges and more hijackings, like I said, and flying into buildings. Yes. And so later on, when Bush says, no one could have imagined that they were going to come out with this plan. And I always said, what about that Philippines thing? Everyone, that was in the news.
Yeah, it was. It was in the news at least once every year. I mean, it wasn't constantly reported on, but it was. You can find a newspaper article practically every year after the discovery of it, and that talks about this threat assessment. So, the Clintons had to worry about this threat assessment all the way through. So, yeah, it was BS on Bush's part, saying, nobody could have imagined. Yeah. Well, that's BS even for himself, because they were going to target him 2 months before 9/11 in Genoa, Italy, for the G8 summit. The Russians and the Italians, told our government, told our CIA or Secret Service, they got to worry about a hijacking to crash into him and kill him. And so they knew something was up. That threat was out there. And
then what was your conclusion for the 93 bombing? Inside job, FBI,
Well, and I don't think it's FBI, and that's an Alex Jones thing, and that's completely wrong. I don't think it's the CIA either. But the problem I have with it is that, I can understand for the landmark plot, the incident that happens, a few months later when they arrest, more of the people that were associates to the 93 bombing, because they were going to target all the New York bridges, the Holland Tunnel, the Federal Building, even the Statue of Liberty, and that's where Imad Salem comes in, the FBI informant, the Egyptian FBI informant. But he was a shady character, and I, from my research and from one of the things that he says, it sounds to me that he was more of an asset for Egypt than he was for the FBI. because I believe he was giving information about a lot of other threat assessments and stuff. But in as far as who was involved, I think that people need to study more of El Sayed Nosair a little bit more further than just even the whole limited thing of Ramzi Youssef and on all of that. Although that story is extremely interesting because he was a fugitive for 2 years and he was carrying out all these other operations overseas and stuff. But when you go back to El Sayed Nosair, he kills Rabbi Meir Kahana in 1990, right? But they found all this stuff in his apartment, and they didn't let that be the authorities know what was going on. Like, yeah, he had the Twin Towers targeted. He had blueprints to buildings and bomb manuals, all these things. I mean, he was. I found out even much more than that. I mean, he was even friends with a former cop from Connecticut who was a Muslim from Albania, believe it or not. But he was even selling arms and stuff because El Sayed Nosair had this cop's arms license to sell arms as well.
Yeah, and
it was found in his apartment. But aside all that, he had manuals for hijackings. So. It's like, yeah, it's important to find the Bojinka plot, because you got that plan and it's got, all these hijackings. But what was El Sayed Nosair? What did he have? What was behind all of him? Yeah,
there was so much going on. Like you mentioned, Meir Kahana, and also one of these guys shot up a school bus with little Hasidic kids on it, right?
I don't know. I don't know if one of them. Who did that?
Dude, I'm an old man. I just told you. I can't remember everything anymore.
I'm not too sure of that.
There's a connection to look it up. There's a connection.
Well, there's a connection to somebody. I know what you're talking about, but I think it's from the mid '80s. But that is important. My point is that the plans to destroy the Twin Towers totally, because the 93 was a failed operation. Basically, they didn't succeed. So they the plans were still there. I mean. That's why it's also weird what you're saying about Bush. We didn't know there was such a plan. Well, the conspirators said they were going to come back and do it. They left one of the other Palestinians, involved. He left a phone message, and they were basically some of the backup letters he had that they found that he said that the Twin Towers would still remain as a target. So my thing is that. People need to research the 80s a lot more as far as the terrorism then, and then look at the intelligence. And it's one of the things that I focus on heavily is the Mossad. So, because they're very tied in with these Muslim and Arab terrorist groups, especially from far back as the 70s, believe it or not. So, because with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the Palestinian oh my God, I'm almost forgetting. Mohammed, Salome, Mohammed Salome. He rented the van, the Ryder van, but the address he left for the police report because he reported it stolen, and the address he left was an address known to have belonged to a Mossad operative named Josie Hadass. So there's all that weird thing going on. Plus, here's the other interesting thing, too. Ramzi Youssef wasn't really that good of a bomb maker either. He really sucked if you could bombing FK Airport, and he comes in with Ramzi Youssef, but Ramzi Youssef gets in through political asylum. But Ajaj doesn't because he's got all these bomb-making manuals. He's got all these fake passports, all this stuff. And despite that, he gets thrown in jail for like 5 or 6 months in a INS facility. They still give him all the stuff that he had on him, and he was able to connect. They were able to make phone calls through a connection in Texas to Ramzi Youssef, so Ramzi Youssef could still get all the bomb making tips.
Oh my God!
Yeah, but here's the thing about this guy. A Jewish writer for the Village Voice, Robert L. Friedman, through his Mossad contacts, finds out that Ajaj was an asset of theirs. of the Mossad that he wasn't even a fundamentalist or an actual hardliner. That he went to jail for counterfeiting U.S. dollars in an American on a U.S. base on a base there, and he was supposed to do 2 years and he only did 6 months, and he went through all this. They trained him and they put him out there and to infiltrate all these groups, and he was the guy that came to he didn't go to the. Here's the other thing too. It's like he didn't go to Afghanistan or fight with the Mujahideen. No. He ended up being deported eventually, and he came to the United States and moved with relatives in Texas, and then he only once went to Afghanistan, but after the war was already over, and he went and got bomb training there and bomb training in Saudi Arabia, and then he comes back with Ramzi Youssef. So there's a lot of things wrong, even with the just limiting it to the Mujahideen. With the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, only one of the guys actually fought in the Afghan-Russian war, which was the red-haired guy, Mahmoud Abu Halima. He was the only one that really went there. Now, some of the guys in the New York landmark plot did. There was also the African, Robert Hampton, and he was paraplegic and he got wounded there. And there was one other guy, but a lot of them, they were from Palestinian groups, Egyptian groups. It was just a mix of.
And also, one more question too, and then we're going to get right into this story about the extra hijacking too.
Sure.
But the thing is, what about? Did you make the connection to the attempted assassination of the Pope to these same guys to 93 and to the same guys to 2000 October 9/11?
Yeah, it's connected.
Yeah, okay.
It is connected, but the whole thing with Bin Laden, that's kind of hard to try to pin it all on him because, well, if you go back to Nasser, Bin Laden was still in house arrest in Saudi Arabia. He wasn't doing anything really there. Al Qaeda wasn't really an actual terrorist organization. Some people try to say that it happened, that it became a terrorist organization in Afghanistan. I tend to believe that it really made itself into one until he got kicked out and he moved to Sudan. That's when it really became like an actual terrorist organization. But this is all before the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. So,
yeah, and during the Reagan administration, the Taliban, their lobbyist in Washington, was the daughter of the CIA director.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. But let's get in. You have an article coming out. First of all, I forgot to ask you, what's the title of that article? The one coming out.
The Luckiest Flight of 9/11, TWA-3.
Luckiest Flight of 9/11, TWA-3. So tell us that story.
Well, this is a little bit of a story that I had put in one of my films. It's called, from a couple of years ago, it's called Inside Job, Boston Logan 9/11. Cover-ups, aborted hijackings, and expositions. And it's basically a film that's, just central around the two flights that were hijacked and Logan Airport, and kind of not too much about all the hijackers, but puts a little bit more attention into Mohammed Atta. Well, despite all of that, despite getting into like the phone calls and the flight, the flight recorders, the black boxes found in Ground Zero, and all this stuff, and because there's a lot of things wrong because they don't show us security video from Boston Logan. They've still never shown us anything. So, despite that, I get into it a lot. It's a lengthy film. It's like 2-hour film. But one of the things I also cover is that Flight 175, on the way to it striking the South Tower, it had 3 near mid-air collisions with 3 different planes. And one of these planes, well, there was a Delta flight, and I forget what the other air carrier, but one of the flights was TWA-3. But TWA-3 was departing and left JFK Airport, and it was like minutes later after it departed. The pilots were told from not the FAA but air traffic control to take evasive action. So they did that, and they basically nearly had a collision with 175. So that evening on ABC News about 7:30 p.m., ABC News actually reported on this near midair collision, and they interviewed the pilot, but they didn't even say who the pilot's name was, and they interviewed a few of the passengers because the passengers noticed the evasive action and stuff. So, well, what happened is last year, New York Post put out an article about my news clip, because I actually have the news clip on my archives channel as well, and because there was also on one of the passengers interviewed, he died already of cancer, but his brother was also on the flight. They were going to Honolulu, and basically, he was also a New York firefighter, ironically, incidentally. So, he basically made a Twitter post talking about how he remembered all of this, and I guess this writer from the New York Post caught on to it. She says, "What? There was this near midair collision?" Well, this firefighter that was on TWA3 had my news clip uploaded on Twitter, and she shared it with the writer. Her name is Elderman. I forget her first name, but anyways, she writes this article, and basically she gets a hold of one of the other stewardesses that was on board, and verifies that talking about the story, and it shows my news clip on the article. And one of the things that they also find out from the stewardess is that not only did it have almost a near mid-air collision with Flight 175, but when it was crossing into Pennsylvania, it was about 1,000 feet away from United Airlines 93. So it basically came to the vicinity of two mid-air collisions. So that was very interesting. Interesting article. So what happened is that I was looking over my channel, and I noticed that news clip of mine, this last year, and I noticed that news clip of mine had like over 20,000 views. I'm like, why does this clip have over 20,000 views? And I was able to track it, and I discovered the New York Post article. But then a woman left a comment on there, and she turned out to be the lead flight manager. And she left a comment on there, and I ended up finding her, tracking her down, because YouTube is, can be painful. It can be kind of a pain in the butt with the, with the comments and stuff, because sometimes your comments don't go through.
Yeah.
So this woman was telling me, she's telling me that she was praising the pilot, that she saved everyone's lives, but she ends up telling me that there were this is just really deep. She ends up telling me that TWA3 wasn't the flight that was supposed to take off. It was a substitute aircraft, because the TWA flight they were supposed to take off on had last arrived from Egypt, and it tested positive for explosives. The bomb sniffing dogs reacted to at least 5 parts of the plane, and they basically had to swap planes, and the TWA3 model was an older model in the hangar, and so she was kind of already nervous and kind of weary. She got to work there, and she was called last minute because there was raining the day before, and something had happened with the flight crew. There was some kind of cancellation or shift changes and stuff. So she was called within like 2 hours before her shift to do this, because she lived not far from JFK Airport. Well, she finds out all this information. Then she's doing her regular, job as far as, making sure that things are set, and there were things that weren't set because this was just a rushed-in plane. And, she noticed that there was an awkward number of Muslim meal requests, which was, she normally doesn't, she's already told me this. She's like, normally doesn't even get this many Muslim requests for halal, no pork and nothing like that, in their food. And that's just, through TWA and other airlines, I assume, you can request, certain kinds of, certain food, certain accommodations. Well,
yeah, back in those days, it was like included in your flight. That was like $100.
Really?
Some piece of junk sandwich or whatever. Oh, back in those days, you kidding me? Yeah, it was all included in the flight.
But anyways, she ends up explaining that Well, she even told me, like, this was like this many meals. It's normal if we fly to Michigan because there's
Right.
in this state there's there are large Muslim populations there. But to go to Hawaii, that doesn't, basically that doesn't make sense. There was a stopover also for St. Louis, Michigan, Missouri. I'm sorry, and that was the only other stop, and then it was supposed to go straight to Honolulu. But as the plane, as she was working the plane, she noticed these weird, Muslim appearing, I'm sorry, not Muslim, but Middle Eastern appearing passengers on the plane in the business section and in coach. They were all in different spots, and they were all acting nervous. They were sitting from different seats across from each other, but talking to each other through the cracks between the seats.
Right.
And she said one set of the people were actually nice, which were the ones that were demanding their meals be catered, but they they ended up getting all their food covered and all that, but it just got everybody nervous, and everybody else, some of her other flight crews noticed. They were asking weird questions like, "Oh, when do we get to the arches in St. Louis?" Because they, by the time after the near-midair collision, the pilot basically called her up to the front, and she goes to the front of in the cockpit, and the pilot tells her, "We're being told we got to land in 18 minutes, or we're gonna be shot down." She's like, "What?" And he points out the window, and there was a NORAD F-16 to the right side, and basically the pilot had asked her, "Do we have any passengers with Arab names?" She freaked out. She told the pilot, "Yeah, we do, but don't tell them."
Well, Nelson, what time was this? Was this was it already on the news at the trade center?
Yeah, because this was already probably by the time that they were in Pennsylvania, and probably after the near midair collision with Flight 93. She didn't even know that part about 93 until the article came out, believe it or not. So not very many people knew about it, and she said, "No, don't do anything about it." So, don't tell them that we have Arab suspects on the plane. So basically, she told the pilot, "You know what? Here's the keys. Here's the keys to the cockpit door. Do not, you keep them up here. Don't let anybody up here. Take the axe down," because they have an axe.
Yeah.
They normally do. I guess for if it crashes, is to break through. Whatever. If a plane crashes and they got to free themselves, and basically to put all the food carts up against the cockpit door and stuff, and they did, and she basically even asked a couple of passengers who appeared to be American to move them in their seats and to be near the front door in case somebody was going to make a move and stuff. But the pilot apparently by that time, he ended up getting on the speaker and telling everybody, we're dealing with a national crisis. Everybody stays in their seat. Nobody does anything. The pilot even told this stewardess, the lead stewardess, that make sure to take all the utensils from everybody.
Let me ask you this, Nelson, real quick.
Yeah.
You spoke to this woman, or you just exchanged emails? You spoke to her.
Yes.
This is a pretty wild story. It's a pretty incredible. Hey, I did this, I did that. I'm a hero. Okay. How did you evaluate her credibility?
I evaluated it because it was to be able to vindicate her story was very interesting. Because she already told me this last year. Well, lo and behold, the pilot finally makes an interview in March last year, right? For this Tillamook Air Museum, and I've actually tried to reach the pilot, but he didn't want to do an interview. Yeah, I actually found him, but anyways, and that's the other problem with the New York Post article. By the way, they only know him by the first name George. They don't know his last name. My article is going to reveal his last name, and it reveals him also because of this interview he does with Tillamook Air Museum in March, and he basically explains that he doesn't get into all the details like the stewardess told me, he didn't mention the F-16s and the threat of being shot down. None of that. He just says that we had to immediately find somewhere to land once we heard word of the attacks. That the Twin Towers were down and all that.
Now were other planes also being
what's that?
Were other planes also being followed by fighter jets, or was this like?
I believe so. Yeah. There were interceptions.
All of them, or just was this like a unique one?
No, there were other ones, but this one's is a unique one because of the story that I've been told from not only the stewardess but from the pilot. Because
Gotcha.
The pilot, ironically, says that that TWA-3 was supposed to take off at 8:00. Well, there was a delay because they swapped planes. He didn't mention the swapping of planes, but he says that they left at 8:45. And then, most importantly, in his interview, he says, "Well, I actually believed our plane was targeted that day because our plane had last flown in from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Cairo, Egypt. That's the last two places it was at." So that vindicates exactly what this woman told me. And I can get her phone number, and I've talked to her back and forth, in very much detail of everything. That's why my article is pretty lengthy as well.
So when they land, do police board and question all these suspicious characters?
That's the thing. That's the thing she was upset by. She's like, nobody came. There was nothing. She's like, I was expecting something, and she said that one of the people that she knew that was on the plane noticed that when some of the Middle Eastern suspects, when they got off the plane, they ran. They were just like nobody else was running. Others were complaining about not having their luggage on the plane, but these Middle Eastern suspects, they ran. So there's a lot of other details I have in my article. So I'm really talking off the top of my head. So people will be able to read it tomorrow because I'm going to have it published tomorrow. Okay,
then once again, I didn't get a chance to write it down. What is the name of the title again?
The Luckiest Flight of 9/11, TWA-3.
And where can people find it?
They can find it on my WordPress blog. It's 9/11 Skeptics versus Truth. Or you can just find me, Thermal Detonator, and you can do a search with that. It's 9/11 Skeptics vs. Truth.
Now, is that the same one where you had to put a password in?
Yes.
So you want to give the password?
Oh, no. I know it'll be published tomorrow. That's just a password for you to read early. They'll be able to read it tomorrow. There won't be require no password.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so then now you're saying that there were even beyond this, there were even more.
Whoa, yeah. Well, yeah. If anybody's watched last year's TMZ special, The Fifth Plane, about Flight 23 from the same airport, JFK Airport.
Yeah.
This is a story that's been kind of known, but people don't ever really kind of focus on it. I mean, I made a documentary about it in my film Bojinka Maximum. It actually begins with this story. And what happened is that this plane, it didn't take off because United Airlines basically told them cancel all the flights once the second plane hit the North Tower, the South Tower, and basically there were Middle Eastern suspects on the plane. They were already taxied in, about to take off, and then they were told to turn around. And then the Middle Eastern suspects on the plane, sitting in business class, some in coach, some further back, all like the same kind of routine pattern. They were all getting feisty, raising hell, demanding that they needed to take off, and all this stuff. And then basically the plane turned around. And basically, investigators found, numerous things left over. They found, weapons and stuff, and it was just suspicious as hell. So this story was already covered briefly in an History Channel documentary, and it's been talked about in a book by one of the co-pilots who confessed to all this. And now with the TMZ special that came out last year, it's a whole hour program, and it gets into all the details, and interviewed, many of the flight crew and the other pilot, and they all confessed to that. Yeah, there was this situation going on, and it was really suspicious. And for that time of the day, or that day,
And then what about you hear those stories about James Woods saying, he was on a plane a week before and blah blah blah, and he saw rehearsals.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I believe it. I mean, he saw, what wasn't it? He saw Marwan al-Shehi, and then one of the Flight 77 hijackers, right? Wasn't it Khalid al-Madar? Or...
I wasn't aware that he recognized any of them. I just that he saw suspicious behavior when he reported.
No, he recognized two of the hijackers. Okay. He recognized Marwan al-Shehi and one of the Flight 77 hijackers.
Are you familiar with Daniel Hopsicker?
Absolutely.
Okay. We know he was a really good friend of mine, right?
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Oh, cool.
I did the first radio interview with Daniel Hopsicker 13 years ago. He had done a YouTube video of a seminar that he went to, and he was very unhappy with that. I did the first interview with him, and we became very close after that. And about 13, 15 interviews with Daniel Hopsicker. So what do you make of his brilliant work, man? Okay, By the way, we did a show, you mentioned before about how much BS there is now in this movement, right?
Yeah.
And by design, man. We did a whole show about John Gray, Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus. You familiar with that?
Wait a minute. Oh, that's the one that Hopsicker talked about that was like funded with
Khashoggi.
Yeah.
Did a whole show about that. Yeah, the guy was in Khashoggi's pocket. He promoted Khashoggi promoted his book. He wrote that stupid book, and the Genesis, everything was Genesis this, Genesis that. Was all over they did those infomercials at night and sold this guy's book. And then this guy goes and becomes the leader of the 9/11 truth movement.
Well, I wouldn't say the leader, but he definitely influenced it in Canada. He was like starting like the first conventions there. Right. And then he had, what's his name? I can't stand him. They still pushing No Plane Hit the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Barry Zillwicker, right? You remember him? You know who he is?
I know the theory. I'm not familiar with the name Zillwicker for sure.
Oh yeah, Barry Zillwicker. He's Canadian, and that's who this guy, the man, I forget his name, the one you were just talking about.
John Gray.
Yeah, John Gray. Yes, that's who he was backing. He was backing Zillwicker, and Zillwicker still to this day, pushes the No Plane Hit the Pentagon theory and all that. So yeah, I mean, Hopsicker was he was very marginalized because he stood firm on the whole thing of there were real hijackers. I've investigated all their activity in Florida, and it's suspicious as hell, just as much as the flight schools and stuff. In fact, I'm glad you bring him up, because the new thing I actually have coming out tomorrow as well is I have a new film coming out tomorrow, and it's called The Double Life of Mohammed Atta. Was the 9/11 ringleader and Al-Qaeda members gay? So a great portion of the beginning of the film actually incorporates a lot of Daniel Hopsicker's research. It covers him interviewing Amanda Keller and all that stuff, and the story of them going to Key West and the drag queens and all of that. That's all going to be part of the film too. So I'll send you that link. You'll definitely want to watch that as well. But
remind me, because Amanda Keller, the woman, she was a stripper, right?
Yes,
and she was Atta's girlfriend.
Supposedly.
But they went to Key West to drag shows. I'm not aware of that.
But they went to they talk about it in the interview. They went to the Key West with the two Dutch guys, Stefan and I forget. But anyways, there was a part they walked right by a drag queen bar, or it was called Divas. And they took photos, being fondled by these drag queens, and Atta did too. And he freaked out because these drag queens stuck their hands down their pants, and it was just really weird. And then I guess Atta got jealous because Amanda Keller started talking, with some of the drag queens too. So, it was just a really perverse thing, and I know in his book, apparently they hooked up, but apparently Amanda said that he wasn't very packed, wasn't very, so I have doubts about it, about all that too, because, well, throughout the film, there's been a lot of people said this, that Atta was gay, a lot of people who've researched them, that was around them, even conspirators, even KSM said so in some testimony, that he quoted them as homos. Yeah, so I basically covered the anomaly of this whole kind of behavior, because there are some other instances of other people involved in that network that were, they were gay, and so I just kind of covered that. But I talked.
Who else was gay?
The guy he was an Iraqi Islamist, the one that was in not the Philippines, but in Malaysia. He worked for an airlines, but for the Malaysia summit, he basically taxied all the guys there and was part of all that. There was also one other guy that was a Kurd who was kind of thrown into Afghanistan, and he was reportedly gay, but he was also not trusted by the Taliban. And there was also another guy named I forget his name. I have it in there. But he's from the neighboring Hamburg cell, and he was known to hang out in gay bars and smoke pot and so. And then not only that, and then then at the end I basically address Saeed Qutb, the supposed to be the founder of the ideology, the Muslim Brotherhood. He's not a founder, but he's a demagogue basically. Well, he never married, and he was never known to have relationships with women other than his sisters. So
that's interesting. And they got that whole thing with the Afghan dancing boys. It seems to be a part of the culture over there. What about did you look into the anthrax attacks, which were so overlapped in all this?
I have, and I've somewhat covered it in one of my films, but not in too much depth. I mean, the anthrax did come from a U.S. laboratory, right? It's just, when was it leaked out? And I don't know, and there's a lot of theories to that too. But there was also, strangely enough, there were also Arabs that also worked in that laboratory too. So it's like, I don't know. It's like people mostly focus on Bruce Ivins, or obviously there's skepticism of that.
I interviewed Richard Lambert, who is the FBI director in charge of that investigation, the anthrax investigation, and he told me he was going to the White House daily to brief Dick Cheney on the progress of the investigation. So then get this. He criticizes after he retires. He criticizes the investigation. The FBI raids him. They raid him and arrest him. Then he turns around, he sues them back, and of course they settle. There's so much.
Wow.
I know, man. There's so much. Plus, there's a connection too. There was a connection to the real estate agent that got the hijackers, the pilots down there in Venice, got them their apartments. The real estate agent was connected to that guy, Robert Stevens, who was the first anthrax victim.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. I forget the name of that. I think one of them weren't they involved in it was a woman, right?
Yeah.
Wait. Wasn't she also like a victim, or not a victim, or something associated with
the first guy that died was a guy named
IRA? With the IRA?
Oh, I don't know about that. That would be interesting too. But also too, that guy Robert Stevens, who was the first anthrax victim, he worked for AMI, which is the National Enquirer, and their building down there in Florida. And so they had to close down that building. And you know who bought that building?
Who?
Rudy Giuliani.
Oh, wow.
Because Rudy Giuliani, and he got it for nothing. Because Rudy Giuliani has super duper anthrax cleaning abilities in his new company that he created at that time. He had an anthrax cleaning company.
Yeah. You know who focuses on that a lot is Robbie Martin.
Yeah, I've had him on the show too. Yeah, we've talked about it too as well, about his anthrax investigation. Very good stuff over there too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just with me. I don't. It's like I don't know when it was leaked out, because there's that story in 1993 and all that with Zach. His last name is Zach, and there was the Egyptian that worked there too, and I forget the names of. It's so much.
Yeah, you've already got a lot of these names memorized. Way more than I think any other guests I've had on here. So you've got a lot. Oh my God.
No, but it's a weird situation, because it's like they were preparing for anthrax attacks before all of that already. I know that for sure, and there were also bogus ones too. Sent out like from weird parts of the country too, So Yeah.
It needs the whole anthrax part of all this needs to be closer looked at, man, because it overlaps. You know,
It does.
But by the way, you want to hear something really? Because then the antidote to anthrax at the time was a drug called Cipro.
Yes.
So they give Cipro to everybody in Congress, right?
Yeah.
You know what the side effect of Cipro is?
What is it?
Confusion.
I didn't know that. Wow.
I remember when they were giving it to him, I says, well, look at the side effect. And he says, this causes confusion. The whole government's going to be confused.
Oh, my God. And they gave it to the government.
What do you know about the connection of these hijackers or pilots and stuff to Las Vegas?
Yeah, I just know that they visited. That's for sure. And I know that when you actually acknowledge that, well, guess what? Las Vegas was a target, too.
What do you know about? What can you tell me about that? Because I lived in Vegas at the time, and my barber met these guys.
Well, there are other planes. I've covered it in Bojinka Maximum. There are planes that are believed to have possibly been, if they would have departed, they would have, if there were extra targets, they would have crashed somewhere in Vegas. There's just a general belief of that. I know some planes were definitely grounded there on 9/11, but I can't pinpoint an exact flight.
I got you. Now, what about you?
But I could tell you honestly, my opinion from what I believe in with the research I've done. I think Flight 93 was originally supposed to target Sears Tower before it turned around and went into the DC, towards the DC area.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
Because there's a bit of a trickiness with the whole story with Ziad Jarrah, the pilot hijacker. But just when you look at the direction it was going, that once the hijackers took over, it was still going, westward for 15 minutes until they decided to turn around. If they knew what they were supposed to do, you just turn around immediately, and it kept going westward into the direction of Illinois, basically. So not just that, Ziad Jarrah had been seen multiple times, and I believe he even did, from his flight schools, even flew a plane from either Florida all the way to Chicago, and even one of his roommates had seen him on the flight simulator program crashing the plane into a building in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And this not just that, just to add to it, Flight 175, Hansen, one of the passengers who called his father, was able to call his father twice, but on the second phone call, this is just like minutes before it hit the South Tower, he said that he heard that hijackers talking, and they were talking about Chicago, and he feared that they were heading towards Chicago because he lost sight of which direction he was at already by that time. So he thought he was even heading towards Chicago, and he says, "I think they're going to hit a building there." So there's a lot of reasons to believe that.
We're talking to Nelson, who's also known as a DJ Thermal Detonator, and you can find him on YouTube at 9/11 True Crime. His Patreon is also called 9/11 True Crime. You can find Thermal Detonator; will pop up there too. Real quick, and then the article is coming out on 9/11 Skeptics versus Truth. Okay,
correct.
We only got about a couple of minutes. Are there any questions I haven't answered you that you really want the audience to know? We got about 3 minutes left.
Oh boy. I guess no, that's about it. We covered enough ground. I just asked everybody to check out my films, and that I'm a big Patreon enthusiast like you are. I recommend people to join my Patreon so you can find out much more stuff that I don't put out on YouTube, and a lot of stuff. I put out stuff at least once a month, and that's about it, really.
Yeah, and it's important, too, to support people who are doing this kind of work by supporting their Patreon, too, as well. So it's not like anybody's getting rich over this, trust me on that. Especially when you got demonetized on YouTube,
Yeah.
I've had so many channels taken down from YouTube and demonetized. I'm bullying Jeffrey Epstein. Okay.
Oh, wow.
All right, So Ed's bullying over here. He's a big, bad bully. So what do you want to leave us with, man?
Well, I guess just check out my new film tomorrow, as well as the Double Life of Muhammad Atta. Were the 9/11 ringleader and Al-Qaeda operatives gay? And that's going to be out on my channel, 9/11 True Crimes. And that's pretty much it,
Mr. Nelson, DJ Thermal Detonator, thank you so much once again. And Patreon, 9/11 True Crime, and YouTube, 9/11 True Crime. And check out this article, 9/11 Skeptics versus Truth. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you. Great having me on.
I'd love to have you come back and just talk about 93. You know, there's so much there. Yeah. And,
absolutely, no problem.
So much went on there, man. I had Tom Secker on here about that. And who else? Then Fred Whitehurst. I had him, Dr. Fred Whitehurst, talked about 93.
Have you had Adam Fitzgerald? Have you had Adam Fitzgerald yet?
I don't think so. What's his story?
Yeah, you got to have him on. He's my friend. You got to have him. He's a great researcher.
Okay, definitely. And, you know, my ex-partner, who was the best man at my wedding in 93, was NYPD Harbor Aviation. And he and his guys are the ones that went to the rooftop and plucked them off the rooftop one by one to rescue those people from that fire.
Which fire was that?
93.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
One by one in a basket, man.
Wow.
I know, man. One of the toughest guys I've ever met in my life. Best man at my wedding. Okay, my friend. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.